A drop of wax stuck to the parchment, leaving a thin trail behind it, like a black crack. The widowed writer realized that the manuscript had reached the moment when it could no longer be hidden. The bells rang in the city for morning service, and her small cell smelled of warm leather binding, damp ink, and clay used to patch cracks. She knew that today the dispute would go from whispers at the fair to an open challenge. She had to write one more page, and then the whole meaning would come together in a clear path. I welcome everyone who is listening to this story. Please write in the comments where you are listening from. It is important for me to know because I want to tell you stories that touch the heart, anywhere. I hope you enjoy listening. Her name was Christina. She was left alone at an early age. Her husband died on the road. Many years have passed since then, but she still kept his pen, carefully wrapped in cloth. There were few things in the house: a table, a bench, a jug of water, a basket with scraps of parchment, a chest with a handkerchief and letters. A young apple tree grew in the yard. The neighbors thought she was strange because she wrote books. She argued with theologians and scribes, not with shouting, but with facts and examples. She wrote down the stories of widows, craftswomen, healers, and girls who learned to read at the doors of the scriptorium, listening to other people's letters through the half-open door. She collected these stories one by one, like beads, and wanted to build a city out of them. In this city, there were no closed gates for those who were usually overlooked. The morning brought a messenger. He handed over a bundle tied with coarse thread. A lead seal, with a foreign coat of arms, hung on the thread. It seemed like an ordinary letter. But the messenger's hands were shaking. He said he had received a coin in the square, and continued on his way because that was what the customer had ordered. He added that he had been told to say that the letter did not contain advice, but judgment. He did not understand the meaning, but he was afraid. Then he left. Inside were 2 sheets of paper. The first contained a list of charges. Christina was called a seductress of minds. Her writings, according to the author, were harmful to order because they taught women to think and argue. The second sheet contained the date of her appearance at the monastery's meeting house. She was ordered to come before the 3rd watch on Wednesday afternoon to give explanations. The date was written in the manner of officials. Wednesday, the 20th day, after the feast of St. Michael. It looked like an official document. But in the fold between the sheets she found a small wrapped bundle of herbs. The herbs smelled bitter. If she threw it into hot wine, whoever drank it would experience aches, palpitations, and fear. She knew this smell because the neighboring witch doctor used it to treat fever, but she said that if you mixed it up, you could cause harm. Someone had put the herbs there on purpose to make the letter smell like sickness. And on the edge of one sheet, almost invisible, was a small mark of soot. It was just like the mark left by a charcoal candle in the scriptorium of the church tithe collectors. Ordinary paper had turned into a domestic thriller. A simple package had become a threat. She thought it was no accident. Someone wanted to scare her before the dispute. They were imposing an image of dark forces on her. She realized that fear would lead her to concede, and the smell of herbs would connect her with unclean medical magic. She went out into the yard and called her apprentice. His name was Martin. He was thin, swarthy, wore a wooden cross around his neck, and everyone considered him a weakling, good only for chewing feathers and cleaning inkwells. He rarely looked people in the eye and was often silent. He was considered a simple servant. But Christina saw how easily he read Greek letters in the margins, even though no one had taught him. She noticed how he corrected her quotations not with an uncertain voice, but with small movements of his fingers over the lines, as if checking the accuracy from memory. She didn't talk about it because she understood how fragile everything above your station was. She protected him from prying eyes. She ordered the letter to be taken to a copyist she knew who sometimes worked for the monastery. It was necessary to find out whose coat of arms was on the seal. She told the student to go through the courtyard where the guards were not watching and not to stop at the market. She said not to argue if they met any monastery novices. She knew that now it was better to remain silent and observe. She herself went to the bookbinder's shop. She was greeted not just by a workshop, but by a lively buzz, where lost pages found their roots and books received their covers. The bookbinder, named Guillaume, was old. His hands trembled, but his eyes saw every thread. He had once taught her husband how to bind notebooks. He was dry and straightforward. He said that the coat of arms on the seal belonged to one of the Dom canons. He added that this canon loved other people's voices, but did not love other people's will. He also noticed that the soot left on the sheet did not smell like the candles in their scriptorium. The smell came from the monastery basement, where the collections were kept. While Christina was running errands, the city went about its usual business. Water in oak barrels on the corner, arguments over the price of grain, laughter from apprentices sewing boots for knights. In the square, a young man was selling an old lyre because his family was in need. A girl on the steps of the church repeated the letters drawn in charcoal and rubbed them with her palm. In all this noise, no one noticed a tall man in a gray cloak stop at the gate of Christina's cell. He looked back, knocked, and, without waiting, entered. Inside the house, he walked over to the table, leaned over the manuscript, and froze. In the margins of the page where she described a city where women had the right to argue and teach, there was a small embroidery in a narrow field. It was a rose with thorns, and next to it was a tiny mark that only she used to make. He touched the page, then turned his head at the sound of footsteps. Martin's was standing in the doorway. He saw the stranger and wanted to close the door, but the tall man managed to leave without saying a word. He walked into the alley and disappeared as if he had vanished into thin air. By evening, the student returned with news. The coat of arms belonged to a canon who was the cousin of an official from the city chamber. This official oversaw the collection of tithes. Recently, several bundles of letters confirming donations had disappeared from the monastery's cellars. If such letters disappeared, it would be possible to declare that someone had not paid and collect the money again. It was profitable, and whoever wanted to deprive Christina of her voice could use the same network. The threat against her and the smell of the coal cellar came together. On Wednesday, the 20th day after the feast of St. Michael, she came to the monastery meeting-house. It was cool there, and the stone walls smelled of lime. There were scrolls on the table. Theologians sat on benches, and city officials stood nearby. The canon with the coat of arms on his seal looked as if he had seen a stick stepping into his garden. He said that her books were harmful. He said that women should not teach. He said that order was maintained by silence. He referred to books and renowned authors. He spoke in an even voice and did not raise his tone because he knew he had power behind him. Christina listened and noted every reference because she noticed how he repeated other people's quotes with mistakes. He confused one name with another, but spoke so confidently that many did not notice. She was given the floor. She did not respond sharply. She said that she writes so that the words of people who are not listened to are not lost. She said that she argues not against faith, but against the habit of considering someone else's voice empty. She said that if God gave us a mind, He did not tell us to hide it under a bushel. She gave examples from the biographies of women who saved cities without taking up the sword. She recalled widows who ran shops and fed neighborhoods during famines. She added that men live alongside this experience and reap the benefits, but rarely call it knowledge. She spoke calmly, and she noticed how one of the theologians began to look at her pen. He leaned over to his neighbor and said something. After that, the Domcanon ordered the scroll to be brought. It was a new scroll. He claimed that herbal remedies had been found in her house, and at that moment, the smell from the letter gained power in the words of others. A simple scroll turned into an accusation. They tried to link her to unclean means. It was a blow to her reputation. She realized that the dispute was no longer fair, and then one of the scribes, an eyewitness in essence, stretched his neck and asked how exactly the herbs had been found. He did not speak aloud. He leaned over to his neighbor, who relayed his words to the abbot. The abbot replied just as quietly, as if everything was going according to plan. But the scribe noticed that, according to the abbot, the herbs had been found by a servant and a court messenger. He said he knew this messenger. He carries a box of yarn and hurries to the North Tower in the evening because that's where the night latch is. It was a sign. One of the theologians realized that the connection led to the girls' shelter outside the monastery walls. Girls without relatives had lived there for some time. People from the city council often came there, and other people's letters were kept there until they were picked up. The meeting ended without a verdict. She was told to bring her writings. She was given a week. It looked like a delay, but in fact it was a trap. In a week, they could gather new stories against her, and by the next time, they would already have witnesses who would say what they needed to say. She walked home and thought about what to do. On the way, she stopped at a well. There was a girl standing there in a rough cloak. She was washing her hands, but she was doing it clumsily, as if she were hiding her trembling. Christina recognized her. She was one of those she had let read letters on the steps. The girl's name was Ethel. She said quietly that she now lived with a rich shopkeeper who employed her for odd jobs. She said that on that night she had seen a tall man in a gray cloak holding a pen that looked like Christina's husband's pen. She said that the man had come twice and once asked questions about the letters in the basement. She was afraid to tell anyone, but now she had told. Her words became the first thread to the hidden root. Christina returned home in the evening. Guillaume, the bookbinder, was sitting in her cell. He sat as if waiting for news. He said that the same tall man had come to him. He asked about the bindings that Christina's husband used for his work. He said he was looking for a pen with a specific notch. He left, but left a strange trace. A coin with a scratched mark remained on the table. It was a mark made by people who worked for the tithe chamber. Guillaume believed that this man was looking not just for a pen, but for proof of a connection between the letters and Christina's house. He wanted to plant something that would later be found. At night, someone scratched at the door. It was Martin. He brought a girl named Ethel with him. She was trembling, but she was holding a thin bundle in her hands. It was a letter. In it, someone warned that there was a man at the gate of the cell with the task of finding a forbidden book and herbs. The message was signed with initials that Christina had once seen in her husband's letters. She froze. These initials belonged to a man who had once helped her husband in his correspondence with the city council. It was the same official, the Dom Canonic's cousin. Everything was intertwined. At dawn, 2 men entered the house. They rummaged through the hay in the corner and turned over the basket of clippings. They found nothing. Christina remained calm. She said she was ready to come to the meeting again, with answers to all the questions. They left empty-handed. When the door closed, she realized that time was against her. But she had people who saw the truth. All she had to do was gather those opinions into one voice. She remembered the widow who lived by the city wall. She was the wife of a merchant who had died. People called her cold because she rarely smiled. In fact, she was conserving her strength. She was good at math and loved order. She read books and once sent Christina a basket of crackers and 2 scrolls of parchment without explanation. Everyone knew she was rich and influential, but she was not openly friendly with anyone. Christina decided to go to her. The road to the widow's house led through the shops. A man with a broken knee sat at the door. His name was Matey. He was a gatekeeper at the city hall. After falling down the stairs, he was sent away. He lived under a canopy and repaired keys. He was considered a beggar. Although his hands worked neatly and quickly, he was despised because he spoke slowly and often mixed up his words. He saw everyone who entered the chamber. He remembered faces and footsteps. No one paid any attention to him. He was someone who was ignored. But he noticed things that others were not interested in. He said he saw a tall man in a gray cloak. He said that the man often passed through the North Tower without signing the book. He said that this man left behind the smell of that very herb that smelled bitter. And he also said that sometimes this man brought narrow bundles wrapped in thread of a special color. It was the yarn that the messenger was holding in his hands. Matey's words connected the smell, the yarn, and the tower. The gatekeeper, whom everyone despised, became the keeper of the key, though not a metal one, but a symbolic one. The underestimated man turned out to be the one who saw the main point. The lady by the wall greeted Christina without unnecessary gestures. She listened and hardly moved her face. She said she had heard about the dispute. She said she was used to women being forbidden to speak when it came to business. She added that she had letters that had been taken to the tithe chamber and copies of receipts in her possession. She explained that she kept them because she did not trust blind chests. She said she was ready to show these papers. She took a wooden chest from the shelf and took out the bundles. There were the very confirmations that were officially supposed to have disappeared. They were marked with the sign of a man in a gray cloak. In the margins were the same scattered Greek letters that Martin sometimes used. Christina felt a suspicion stir within her. She remembered how the student had corrected her quotations. She remembered that he wore a ribbon of a certain weave around his neck, and the same ribbon tied a knot on one of the letters. She realized that the thread led to her house, but not because he was an enemy, but because in this story he had a closed door that he had kept silent about. She returned to the student and began to ask about his past. He was silent for a long time, then said that he was born in a monastery. His mother died when he was a boy. He was raised by a scribe who sometimes brought him bread and gave him old sheets to read. This scribe was the brother of a man from the chamber, and later became a servant of the Dom Canon. Martin's father had disappeared. Since childhood, he had worn a ribbon around his neck, left to him by an unknown man who had secretly told him that the boy must be protected. Christina realized that there was a connection in this chain, but she could not immediately name it. She asked him to show her any sign that could explain where the ribbon came from. Martin took a green stone set in a fragment of a silver plate out of a tiny box. There was a tiny mark on the plate. It was a mark she had seen once on a letter from her husband, from many years ago when they had just moved to this city. Her husband said he had helped a young man get into the scriptorium. This young man kept the stone from his father, but did not know who he was. Her husband said that someday the stone would return to the house where it would be understood. The words fell into place. Martin turned out to be the secret son of the same scribe her husband worked with, and the scribe was the brother of the Dom Canon. It was a hidden kinship that explained too much. That was why the smell, the yarn, and the soot were drawn to Christina's house. That was why the tall stranger was looking for her husband's pen. He wanted to link her husband's name to the missing letters and cover up the traces of a family that wanted their coat of arms to be clean. Christina did not immediately tell her student that she understood. She understood how easy it was to destroy a fragile soul in an instant. She said she had a plan. She went to the widow by the wall and asked her for help. The widow nodded. She said she did not like noisy defenses in the courtroom, but she knew how to resolve matters with a single decision. She said she was ready to become an unexpected benefactor. She ordered 2 people to be invited. One was a policeman who served honestly without much talk and who hated the theft of documents. The other was a young knight who wanted glory, not with a sword on the battlefield, but through acts of justice, because his family had been disgraced by a long-standing accusation of cowardice. He needed a clean victory. They agreed. The widow paid the porters, and at night a small procession approached the North Tower. Matey, the underappreciated gatekeeper, showed them how to turn the lever behind the stone. He did it as easily as if he were just adjusting an old key. They entered the basement. It smelled of potatoes, dampness, and that same bitter herb. There were bundles on the shelves. On the barrel stood a lamp with a charcoal candle, the kind that leaves soot on paper. On the table lay a stranger's pen, with a notch very similar to her husband's. Next to it was a box of yarn, in the color the messenger had mentioned. Everything lay as if the owner had stepped out for a moment. But a tall man in a gray cloak stood behind a pillar. He was not expecting guests. He took a step, wanting to escape, but the young knight blocked his way. The constable placed his spear at the door. The widow said she did not like unnecessary words. She ordered the nearest chest to be opened. Inside were letters about donations that were considered lost. Some of them had tiny Greek letters on them. These letters and the yarn connected the chamber's affairs with the canon's house. It was clear enough, even without a loud argument. But the case had to be secured so that it could not be overturned. The connection had to be shown through evidence, not conjecture. Christina found a letter with a mark similar to the one on Martin's stone. She realized that this mark belonged to the person who gave orders to the scribes. She said she would not name the person until he revealed himself in words that could be written down. She gave him a good chance to confess without torture. She understood that the city loved shouting, but the truth required a precise knot, not a whip. She took a small wax tablet out of the basket. They wrote down what they had found in the basement. They made a list with marks. The widow signed it. The town constable signed it too. The young knight affixed the seal that his father had given him permission to use. Mathieu touched the wax with his mark, which he used when repairing keys, although no one asked him to do so. He did it out of habit. His mark from his needle workshop was placed next to the seals. This mark would later play a decisive role, because it would prove that there was a person there whom no one considered important, which meant that the whole scene had not been staged in advance by people in power. At dawn, they arrived at the meeting house. The deacon came out to meet them. He was calm. He said that rumors were circulating, but the truth lay in the books. He said that all the sudden accusations smacked of envy. He said he was ready to listen to the writer's widow's response again, but first he would show her how a woman should speak. At that moment, the widow took a scroll with seals from under her cloak by the wall. She put it on the table. She said she did not like to waste time. She explained that they had found where the papers that were thought to be lost were kept. She showed a birch bark tablet with notes on it. She explained that there was a man in the basement whose hands smelled of that very herb. She added quietly that if anyone argued today, they would risk going against simple things: yarn of a certain color, soot on the edge of a piece of paper, a knot in a string tied by girls from the orphanage, and a mark on a small stone, worn by the sons of those who do not recognize their families. The widow's words sounded dry, without anger. This made them seem heavier. Dom Canonic turned pale but held his ground. He ordered the scribe from the chamber, his own brother, the one who had once worked with Christina's husband, to be brought in. The scribe arrived, tired and gray. He said he knew nothing about the missing letters. He said he had not seen any scrolls in the basement. At that moment, Matey, the gatekeeper with the broken knee, raised his hand. He did so awkwardly. He asked to speak. No one would have listened to him if the widow had not nodded. He said he had seen the scribe enter the north tower at night. He said he could recognize the scribe's voice even by his footsteps, because he shuffled his left foot due to a leg injury sustained on the stairs. He said that this shuffling sound could be heard even through the door if you stood in the shadows and held your breath. He added that once the scribe had said that he had a son, and that someday the boy would learn the truth, because he wore a different kind of ribbon around his neck. The people in the hall gasped. The scribe turned pale. He realized that his secret had been revealed. He confessed. He said he had been collecting letters to make people pay twice. He said he wanted to raise the family of his brother, the Dom Canonic. He said he was afraid that Christina would ruin his plan because her books taught people not to be silent. He said he had ordered herbs to be planted so that her name would smell of danger. He added that the boy who grew up without a father was his son, but he couldn't name him because he was afraid of disgrace. He said he tried to pull his husband's pen out of the cell to link his husband's name to the missing letters, so that everything would seem like an old sin and not a recent affair. The hall was silent. Martin stood by the wall and looked away because he didn't know what to do with this. Christina approached him. She didn't speak aloud, but everyone saw her place a small stone with a silver plate on his palm. She gently squeezed his fingers. She acknowledged the relationship, although she did not demand that the scribe become the father publicly. She took into her home someone who had previously been just a student. It was her choice and her risk. She knew that her life would now become more difficult, but it would be her decision, not someone else's decree. It was moral clarity in a matter where filth had long reigned. Dom Canonic had to bow his head. He tried to explain that he knew nothing about his brother's affairs. He counted his words like coins, trying to find a way out. But the widow by the wall pronounced that one decision. She announced that she was handing over the letters and the list of signatures to the ecclesiastical court. She added that on that very day, the 20th day after the feast of St. Michael, she was opening a school for women to learn to write by her wall, and that Christina would be the first teacher there. She said she had enough money to pay for parchment and ink. She explained that if anyone tried to stop her, she would stop giving money to the tithe chamber until the court figured out what was going on. She was the unexpected benefactor who changed everything with one move. The crowd in the square began to buzz. People loved spectacle, but they loved simple, understandable truth even more. They saw that their small, everyday lives were connected to big books. They understood that the subject of the dispute was not about the pride of one widow, but about their letters and money not disappearing into basements. They understood that in this city, women's hands ran the shops, fed the children, and knew how to count. They saw that it was possible to argue and win not with a knife, but with clear evidence. The young knight who dreamed of a clean victory achieved it not on the battlefield, but in the basement, and his family ceased to be branded as cowards because he did not back down in the face of authority. Mathieu, the gatekeeper, whom no one needed, became a hero. His mark from the needle on the wax proved decisive, because it was he who proved that the act of discovery had not been faked. They stopped chasing him away from the door and gave him a place at the school. He became the keeper of the keys and taught the boys to repair locks so that they would not look for shortcuts. Christina returned home. She opened the chest with her husband's letters. She reread the lines where he talked about a city where words serve a cause, not fear. She placed the notched pen that the tall man was looking for next to it. This pen was now evidence not of evil deeds, but of pure connection. She closed the lid and picked up the manuscript again. She wrote about a city of women where everyone knew how to count, argue, and teach. She included stories of those she knew: widows, shopkeepers, healers, girls from the steppes, gatekeepers, bookbinders. She explained that this city was built not on swords and flags, but on the clear right to speak and listen. In the evening, the scribe, Martin's father, came to her. He stood with empty hands. He said he was ready to accept punishment. He asked for only one thing: that the boy not bear his guilt because he did not choose his parent. Christina replied that the boy already carried his own burden and his own work, and that his father's guilt remained with his father. She did not say it aloud, but it was clear from her actions. She asked the scribe to sign a confession before the court and name everyone who had helped him. He agreed. It was his choice, and that choice closed the dark chapter of history. A week passed. The school by the wall opened. The first day was noisy. The girls whispered letters. The boys craned their necks to see the pen. The widow walked between the benches and made sure everyone had enough parchment. Mati taught the children to work with precision. The young knight came in the mornings and brought water. Guillaume, the bookbinder, gave away scraps so that the children would have bookmarks. The policeman sometimes dropped in to check on order and brought news about the court. Dom Canonic kept to himself. He went to court, said the necessary words, nodded, and looked tired. The city council was forced to return the money to those it had tried to make pay twice. There were no more strangers' scrolls in the basement. New people were appointed there, and another lock, made by Métis, was put on the door. One day, A tall man in a gray cloak came to the school. He took it off and turned out to be not scary, but simple. He was older than he looked. He asked Christina to allow him to work off the restoration of the book he had once ruined with his soot. He brought paper and a coal lamp, but did not light it inside, instead taking it outside into the breeze so that the soot would not settle on the edges. He said he wanted to make amends for what he had done. Christina agreed. She believed that people should be given the opportunity to make amends, but she did not absolve him of responsibility and did not forget what had happened. She simply channeled that energy into work. At the end of autumn, the city was living more peacefully. It wasn't immediately apparent. But bread stopped disappearing from the shelves without payment. There were fewer cries about missing letters in the square. The girls no longer read on the steps furtively, but openly at school. The widow counted piles of coins and knew where they would go. She supported the city's defense not with swords, but with notebooks. Christina finished writing her manifesto. She called it the City of Women. She did not ask for special privileges for them, but demanded something simple: the right to learn, to speak, and to defend themselves and their cause. She explained that knowledge is not a whim or pride. It is a tool, just like a carpenter's hook or a shoemaker's knife. She added that where women's voices are heard, walls are not torn down, but bridges are built. She gave the manuscript to the bookbinder. He carved a rose with thorns on the cover. It was a sign that dignity lies not in soft, petal-like beauty, but in the ability to maintain boundaries. Guillaume left a blank space on the inside cover. He said it was a place for future names. He believed there would be many. On the day the manuscript was returned to the house, people gathered at the gate. They did not shout. They just stood there because they wanted to see the book enter the city. In the crowd stood the widow by the wall, the young knight, the policeman, Mati with his bandaged knee, and the girls from the steps. The scribe, Martin's father, stood a little apart under guard, waiting to be sent to the monastery dungeon. He did not try to cry or seek sympathy. He understood that this was the right thing to do. Martin stood next to Christina. He kept the pebble with him but did not hide it. He was no longer just a student. He was part of the household. He helped transcribe manuscripts and taught the younger children to write neat letters. In the evening, when everyone had left, Christina laid 3 things on the table: her husband's pen, the stone with the silver plate, and a small birch bark tablet with a list of the scrolls from the basement. She placed some fresh bread next to them. She thought that justice sometimes looked like a quiet table, with simple things laid out in the right order. It was neither a celebration nor a punishment. It was home. She sat down and wrote a few lines for those who would read them years later. She explained that truth is not based on a single gesture, but on the intersection of many small decisions. She said that we should not divide people into camps, but teach them to see the ties that bind us together. She added that the strongest power grows when everyone has a job and a voice. She wrote that a city of women does not take away men's place, but teaches them to look at each other without fear. She woke up before dawn and stared for a long time at the window, behind which the lights of the watchtower flickered. It seemed to her that everything had already been decided. But life rarely lets go so easily. On the second day after the manuscript was returned to the house, a messenger appeared at the door again. This one was young and stubborn. He brought a tiny bundle, as if from a spice shop. Inside was a note. It said that there was a new rumor going around town. Supposedly, the book that Christina called The City of Women was written by a man, and the widow's name was used for beauty. Supposedly, a woman could not have laid out the argument so clearly. Supposedly, the widow had only signed her name. The paper echoed the old cry. But now it was not a court, but the poison of empty mockery. It seemed trivial, but such trifles contained the seeds of new blows. An ordinary piece of paper by the door turned into a continuation of the thriller. Someone was again trying to take away her authorship, to return her to the shadows. Christina understood that a loud meeting would not help. Another scene was needed. She decided to conduct a public review. She proposed to arrange a rewriting of a chapter from her book in the square in front of witnesses. She knew that writing skills could be demonstrated not only in silence, but also in noise when people were walking around. She turned to the school by the wall and said that before rewriting, several girls and boys would also write one example each so that people could see how a text is born. She decided to show not only her hand, but also the growth of the hands around her. The widow supported her. She prepared tables, ink, and sheets of parchment. The young knight made arrangements with the town guard so that no one would interfere. Mati brought a stand for the inkwell so that it would not fall from the jolts. Guillaume sharpened the quills. People gathered in the square. Theologians also came. The canon stood in the shade but did not leave. When it all began, Christina sat down at the table and started writing. She did not rush. She wrote the letters evenly. She kept her other hand on the margins to push off with her fingers when the line ended. She worked quietly and confidently. Around her, children whispered letters and tried not to smudge the edges. The crowd was noisy at first, then fell silent. People saw the work, not the image. They understood that the text was being born here, before their eyes. It was the answer to the new rumor. During the rewriting, another important scene took place. A girl dropped her pen and spilled ink. A young scribe sent from the chamber was standing nearby. He smiled and wanted to leave, leaving the girl with the stain. But Martin quickly placed a thin board under the sheet, took the girl by the hand to the jug, helped her wash the edge, and returned the work to the table. His movements were confident and precise. He saved the sheet, and the letters on it remained legible. People saw this and began to murmur in a friendly way. They saw how the boy, whom many considered an empty servant, managed the work like a master. It was a clear turning point, where hidden talent defeated status and laughter. He was now respected, not out of pity, but for his work. Dom Canonic came closer. He watched as Christina's hand wrote the lines. He realized that the dispute over who was the author was meaningless. He suggested ending the dispute. He said he was ready to recognize her book as Christina's own work. He added that he was asking the widow by the wall to give him permission to open a separate shelf in the monastery for books written by women. His words sounded not like mercy, but like an attempt to save face. But it was a move in a direction that would have been unimaginable a month ago. The people in the square applauded, and again, the loudest sound was not shouting, but the rustling of pages. In the evening, 3 people approached Christina's house. The first was an old knight, the father of the young man. He was rough, unaccustomed to talking to scribes. He said that he used to consider women's books empty. But today, in the square, he saw an order that could keep his house in order. He asked for several copies of the book for his daughters and daughters-in-law. He said he wanted them to be able to count and read contracts. He left without saying goodbye, but left his purse on the table. It was a strangely simple proof that even a heart of stone can be moved if it sees clarity. The second was a jeweler. He brought small silver clasps for notebooks. He said he was willing to give them away once a month because his wife had read the chapter about the city of women and was no longer afraid to go out to the shop. He said this dryly, but his eyes sparkled. He realized that his home had become richer without unnecessary purchases. The third was a healer. She brought a small bundle of herbs, the very ones that smelled bitter. She placed them on the edge of the table and said that the herbs were not to blame for dirty deeds. She asked to write down her knowledge in simple words in a new notebook for women so that no one would confuse the useful with the harmful. She said she was ready to teach girls how to distinguish between doses and know how not to cause harm. Christina agreed. She decided to include not only stories from books in the city of women, but also the craft of the body. This was important because life is not made up of letters alone. A few weeks later, a board with rules hung on the school wall in the city. It said that no one should dare to impose their fears on women and call it order. It said that in this place, people argue with facts, not whispers from around the corner. It said that the words of the students would be protected like goods in a shop and like grain in a barn. It said that anyone could come in off the street and ask why things were the way they were, and they would be heard. These were simple, clear rules. They became part of the city, like a gate in a garden. The scribe's trial took place without torture. His confession, the signatures on the tablet, the mark of Matey's needle, and the widow's seal made the case clear. He was punished by being sent to work in a bookbinding workshop for several years. He was forbidden from working with documents. He was ordered to bring 1 roll of parchment to the school every week so that the girls could study. This was not leniency. It was calculation. The city decided that it was better to get something useful for the future from the guilty party than to break his stubborn spirit and forget the lesson this story taught. Dom Canonic retained his title, but his power diminished. He could no longer give orders as easily as before. He now had to consult with the widow, the town constable, the knights, and even the gatekeeper. The world became a little more complicated, but also a little more honest. The school did not close during the long winter. They lit the lights at noon when it was dark. The girls knitted simple, warm hats for those who were cold on the wall. The boys carried water and cleaned the tables. Christina wrote a new notebook. She explained how to argue without arousing unnecessary anger. She gave examples from the recent life of the city. She told how once an ordinary parcel became the beginning of a threat, and how this threat was unraveled by the hands of people who were not loved. She wrote simply, so that her words could be read not only by scribes. She avoided beautiful images because life was already complicated. In the spring, the apple tree in the yard bloomed profusely for the first time. It was a sign not from a fairy tale, but from ordinary times. The tree had survived the winds and frosts. It stood like a simple house and was useful. Christina placed a bench under the apple tree. The widow, Mati, the young knight, Guillaume, the healer, and the children sat on it in turn. They discussed city affairs. They spoke not as great men, but as neighbors who lived side by side. They decided where to put the new water tank, how to divide the bundles, who to give the first textbook to, how to accept a girl who was afraid of people. They learned to listen. When St. John's Day came, strangers came to town. Among them was an old man who called himself a teacher from a distant monastery. He tried to convince people that the school by the wall was harmful. He said that women should stay at home and pray. He said that dirt from the benches sticks to the parchment and spoils the knowledge. He talked a lot. They answered him briefly. They showed him a board with rules, a book with smooth pages, girls who read and do not shout. He left, having achieved nothing. His words dissolved in the noise of the fair. By autumn, the city had changed. Not suddenly or miraculously, but through action. Shops cheated less often. Letters stopped disappearing from the chamber. The monastery began to treat schools as places where order grew, not rebellion. Once a month, the canon came to class, listened to the reading, and left silently. He no longer argued as fiercely as before. He gradually taught himself to live alongside what he had initially hated. The scribe worked for Guillaume and silently handed him the cords. He kept his head down, but did not try to justify himself. He did his job. He sometimes looked at Martin, but did not approach him. The son did not glance at his father, and that was right. Life does not have to bring everyone together at the table to hug each other. Life is content with order and honest work. Christina finished a new scroll. It was simpler than a manifesto. It was a notebook of instructions for those who argue. She gave it to the school and the monastery. She signed it not with her name, but with a rose with thorns. People knew whose hand it was. They didn't need a special signature. The city understood that it wasn't so important who spoke louder, but who acted more accurately. Since then, Whenever there was an argument in the city, the residents remembered the story about the parcel, the basement, the soot, and the grass. They remembered how a simple gatekeeper became a hero, how a rich widow crushed a cunning network with a single decision, how a boy's hidden talent became stronger than ridicule, how a suddenly revealed kinship cut the thread of blackmail, how an ordinary piece of paper at the door opened up a whole mine of dirt, and how the steady hand of a widow and writer wrote a new line in the square that everyone could see. They understood that the city did not live by spells, but by everyone doing their job and being ready to stand up for the truth when it was under pressure. She knew that her city of women was not a stone fortress with bastions. It was a path that had to be walked every day. It was a choice that had to be repeated. It was a pen that had to be sharpened. It is an apple tree that must be watered. It is eyes that must be lifted to see. She did not consider herself a saint and did not call down fire from the sky. She simply did what she could and taught others to do the same. And that turned out to be enough to make it easier to breathe in one city, in one courtyard, in 1 year, after a harsh winter. And when Christmas came at the end of the year, the streets were lit up, the house smelled of bread, and her manuscript lay on the table. People said that this house had a peaceful light, and someone added that peaceful light is found where no one is afraid to write their name next to the truth. That was the moral clarity of this story. It was born not from a miracle, but from the choice of people who stopped being silent and started taking action.